So we have to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 340, because this chapter not only lays out the plan for the heroes to take out All For One and Shigaraki, but Horikoshi is blatantly telling us how My Hero Academia will end. And to get a full understanding as to how that is the case, then you have to watch it to the end. But it just breaks my heart that chapters like these can be so emotional for me, while at the same time makes me feel even more emotional, being that I can see how Horikoshi is going to handle the end of My Hero Academia. Hey, I'm Wise, and one time I scratched my entire side of the face on the ground and didn't want to go to the hospital. Probably because they would have to put peroxide on my face, and that would have hurt a lot. But interestingly enough, My Hero Academia chapter 340 starts off in a hospital. Central Hospital, in fact, where we focus exclusively on the Aoyama case, despite the fact that Central Hospital has many people who we should know their whereabouts. Characters such as Lady Nagan, Mr. Compress, and I believe Dr. Uchiko as well. But the main focus on this chapter is the well-being of Aoyama and the plan to effectively defeat All For One and Shigaraki. Now, it is important to know that this plan to take out All For One and Shigaraki is probably the most difficult plan in the history of existence. And that's not just my words, that is actually All Might's words, where he quite literally says this is neither the best nor the second best plan when it comes to taking out All For One and Shigaraki. However, it's a plan that the heroes 100% need to do if they're going to take out All For One and Shigaraki. So what is this difficult plan that All For One is trying to explain to all of these heroes? Well, the plan is to separate All For One and Shigaraki. All Might mentioned that judging from the recorded data from the Start and Stripe battle versus Shigaraki, it's clear that Shigaraki has well surpassed All For One when it comes to strength. But just because Shigaraki has surpassed All For One in strength doesn't make All For One weak. And in fact, this weakened body All For One has displayed his strength in Kamino and in the raid for Tartarus, which should have people respect the fact that even though he's not stronger than Shigaraki, he surely is one of the strongest characters physically in the series. So much so that if the heroes were to face off against Shigaraki and All For One's real body simultaneously, they would have no chance of winning. So the plan has to be to separate All For One and Shigaraki by at least 10 kilometers. So in theory, if the heroes are able to separate All For One and Shigaraki about 10 kilometers plus, they should be able to prevent direct communication between All For One and Shigaraki and be able to tend to them individually, which still is the most difficult thing for them to do, being that these are two of the top strongest characters in the series. But hey, it's a part of the plan. But they can't just separate All For One and Shigaraki, because Tsukauchi responded by asking All Might, wouldn't the villains also be wary of that and make sure that it doesn't happen? Which further expands this plan into its totality, which is that villains like Toga, Spinner, and Dabi are just as dangerous as All For One and Shigaraki respectfully. And if any one of them were to intervene, then it could be GG's for the heroes. So to prevent that, the main goal for the heroes are to separate every single main villain in their own respective areas. That way, each and every villain will have their own individual things that they need to tend to, and they can't communicate with each other to get an upper hand against the heroes, even though they will be stronger than the people that they are fighting. Which makes it even more difficult, because the prerequisite is for them to separate them, but that doesn't guarantee that they will be able to effectively defeat the villains, because the villains are typically stronger than the heroes that they're about to fight against. Which is why, in order for this plan to work out, they need to create a strategy to execute this plan perfectly. And that is where Aoyama comes in. Now, when it comes to Aoyama, he is yet again a very fascinating character, because not only is he going to be a key factor into the strategy to defeat All For One, but he also is a huge representation to the end of My Hero Academia. I want to focus more on the representation of Aoyama and how he shows or expresses how My Hero Academia will end. And it has to do with not only the conversation that Aoyama had with Aizawa Sensei in My Hero Academia chapter 340, but it also connects to the information that we received about Aoyama in My Hero Academia chapter 338. And I actually have a pre-edited audio clip for why Aoyama represents the end of My Hero Academia, which connects heavily to My Hero Academia chapter 340. So listen closely and let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. By the way, if you want to collect My Hero Academia mangas, check out my Amazon shop store, where you can purchase every single volume of My Hero Academia and I get a small commission for your purchase. The link will be in the description, description and also in the pinned comment. Now when it comes to the UA trader, I personally believe that you can't just look at the UA trader as just the UA trader. And in fact, you have to look at the past of Aoyama to get a better idea as to what the UA trader is somewhat symbolizing. Being that Aoyama, who was revealed to be the UA trader, was born quirkless in a world where 80% of the world's population has quirks, he immediately sees himself in a similar situation as Deku. And interestingly enough, it doesn't just stop there, because in Aoyama's backstory, Horikoshi made it evidence to have Aoyama express that he's afraid to be different. And it's not just his backstory. Aoyama throughout the entire series had displayed this idea of wanting to be equal to other people, with the most blatant example being him directly saying those exact words to Ida during the provisional hero license exams.
Our classmates are just so amazing. All I want is to be seen as their equal, to prove myself.
Which is coincidentally the event that happened right after the Kamino incident. He quite literally said that after seeing the events of Kamino and All For One getting taken into custody by the police and losing to All Might, that he was free to have true friends and stop playing in charades. So when Aoyama told Ida that he wants to be equal, he did it with the mindset that he's had from the 10 years before Aoyama used him to get into UA. Because again, he was born quirkless and all he wanted to do was become equal. And in order to become equal, he unfortunately got into bad ties and a connection with All For One, giving him a quirk. And I'm saying equal a lot because it's needed to be understood that this is what he desires, to be equal. And the idea of being equal in and of itself is a direct parallel to Deku's character. Because if you remember in the very first chapter, and in fact the very first 5 words stated in the entire story of My Hero Academia, Deku's first words were,
Here's the sad truth. All men are not created equal. When I was 4 years old, I learned that some kids have more power than others.
Which is the exact reference that have him parallel Aoyama, being that they were both born quirkless in a world where 80% of the population had quirks. And I also find it quite fascinating that being that they're the same age, although Aoyama is about 3 months older than him, that would mean that Deku and Aoyama were both the exact same age when they found out that they were born quirkless. But the main difference between them was that the next words that Deku said after saying people are not born equal is that,
but that won't hold me back.
However, not allowing this idea of being different to affect how he thinks about the world and achieving what he wants. Whereas Aoyama, who eventually became the UA trader, thought differently, and when asked by his parents if he wanted to be like everyone else, he said yes, because being different is scary. These are all vital pieces of information because it's just a slight twist in the thought process of both of these characters, yet the ramifications for their actions after that change things drastically. Where for Deku, it was quite literally because he was born different, because he was born quirkless, that allowed him the ability to not only be granted One For All, but effectively can use One For All to its fullest potential without any ramifications to his body. And the complete opposite is true for Aoyama because it is his mindset and how he viewed things connected to his parents' emotional reaction to the idea that their son cannot live the lifestyle that he wants, that created him getting connected with All For One and effectively making him the UA trader. Now again, why is this important? Because the UA trader reveal is in the last act of My Hero Academia, and the UA trader being revealed to be Aoyama, having a direct parallel to Deku in the first 5 words of the entire series, tells me that Aoyama is a representation of all people who view themselves as different and all people who are considered villains in the entire story of My Hero Academia, which is essentially answering the question of what it truly means to be a hero by expressing Horikoshi's ideals through Class A and Deku to Aoyama, who is a villain. So essentially, the end of My Hero Academia is tied to the first 5 words of My Hero Academia, where what it truly means to be a hero is to recognize that circumstances create both heroes and villains, and that because of that, you're not any better or worse than anybody, and in fact, you're still all equals, which is exactly why Deku will always reach out to anyone who is in need. Now that we got my thoughts on that particular area out of the way, now let's talk about Class A and their involvement into this entire matter. And it's actually quite simple to understand my thoughts on this particular situation, mainly because Horikoshi quite literally had Deku, or the narrator of My Hero Academia, express the future of Class A and how important they're going to be to the story and to society as a whole. But let me explain my thoughts. Now, how this connects to the Aoyama situation is the most blatant idea idea around Deku's character and his development throughout the entire series, where it's expressed almost in every single way that the ideals of All Might, which is the idea that Deku was going to be using had he continued going rogue, was the epitome of doing things wrong, especially when the initiation of the destruction of Hero Society was created because All Might had his last battle in Kamino against All for One. Putting all of society's hope and responsibility on one person never works out, because not only will there become an inevitable time when you effectively die, but arguably the most important thing is you're literally not able to save everyone, but yet you will always be looked at as someone who actually saves everyone. And with the repercussions of those actions, you have characters like Shigaraki, who needed somebody to save him, and while everyone was viewing All Might as this symbol of peace, someone who saves every single person with a smile, All Might being one man was not able to save him at all, which is why he hated All Might and Hero Society more than anything. So going back to the Deku Rogue arc, Class A working together doing everything they can to save Deku from himself is quite literally the epitome of trying to embody saving everyone. So in Class A embodying the ideology that they're going to work with Deku and try to save everyone that they possibly can, we carry on to the reveal of the UA traitor being Aoyama, and why it 100% makes sense why Class A was able to let bygones be bygones and accept Aoyama even though he did bad things. It's not just because he did bad things, because again in My Hero Academia chapter 337, Deku says you're not a villain for life just because you do bad things, and it's only if you desire to help out and do good that you can effectively change and be good. So if Deku embodies that and Class A embodies exactly what Deku embodies, then they would do the exact same thing that Deku would do, especially when in that instance of Aoyama being revealed as a UA traitor, they quite literally got all the context they needed to understand why he became the UA traitor in the first place, which was that All for One was the one who gave him the quirk, and we know that All for One is the most manipulative person in the world. So essentially it's Aoyama and his parents being naive to their own belief system that changed the trajectory of their existence. One bad decision, one flip of a coin that created a villain, which is the exact same scenario, fortunately or unfortunately, that connects to Shigaraki, which is that essentially it took one day or one person doing one action that changed the course of both of their lives. And that is important because, as I said in the beginning of this video, Aoyama represents villainy as well, and that's evident in My Hero Academia chapter 338. President Might said, "A crime is a crime, and I hate to say it, but you bunch are the biggest victims here. Can you really trust this guy now?" To which Ida responded, "That is in the past. The responsibility also lies with us for being unable to perceive what lay in his heart, which is precisely when we witness our classmate weeping in despair. Our urge is to reach out to him as friends, to allow him to take our hands, because that is the only way we can once again make him our equal, our peer." Now, if you take every single word that Ida was talking in reference to Aoyama, who represents all of villainy, and if you consider that this is a story of how Class A is going to become the greatest heroes, meaning that they are going to be the trailblazers for the next society when it builds up, this will be the ideology for the next society when they build it up. Mainly because every single point that Ida mentioned in this chapter is the exact reason villainy is created in the first place. Feeling like you're not equal or not the same creates discrimination, which creates villains. And a perfect example of that is quite literally Spinner and Toga, where the idea that taking responsibility also lies on Class A, who could be represented as the future society, is the exact reason why villains like Shigaraki was created in the first place. He was created through the twisted ideology of society, who has this fairy tale idea of what it means to be a hero versus a villain. And the new ideology of Class A hits even deeper when you go back to Aoyama, the page right before that, where when everyone was saying that even though Aoyama is a UA traitor, he might be the only person who can deceive All for One and help them as heroes defeat All for One. Aoyama was thinking to himself, why? Why would they turn to me when I'm a despicable villain? Perceiving himself as somebody who is not even worthy of them being in the same room as them, doing any activities together because he is not equal. And when you read between those lines, this could very much be a setup to Shigaraki in the future, and that the idea of Shigaraki being redeemed in the first place could be so far-fetched because he's done so many horrible things that he felt that he had to continue labeling himself as something that he doesn't want to be because he feels like he can't be equal to heroes, which is represented in the idea that Tinko Shimura is still inside of Shigaraki and All for One's Vestige world, inside All for One and Shigaraki's merged fused form. So Class A essentially forgiving Aoyama for being the UA traitor and trying to work with him so long as he has the hope and drive to want to be better in the future not only represents all of villainy and how heroes and society should view them, but it also seems to be a direct reference to what will happen in the future with Shigaraki. And not just Shigaraki, but maybe Dabi as well. And none of this could have ever happened unless the UA trader, who viewed himself as someone who is not equal to his peers, was found out to be the UA trader, and instead of chastising him and calling him less than and naming him a villain, his peers took time to understand what caused him to become a villain in the first place and understood that he is no different than anybody. It's just one circumstance that caused his entire life to shift. With all that being said, I hope you all understand why I believe that Aoyama is a huge component for My Hero Academia's future. But it's not going to be just Aoyama by himself, and instead it's going to be his classmates and peers that are going to help and protect him in this final war in My Hero Academia. And your time also needs to be protected, which is why you should watch this video right here, because that makes zero sense, but it talks about My Hero Academia. Wing his own every single